Dan Bongino leaned toward the microphone and declared with absolute calm that he intended to expose her as the greatest charlatan in the history of Congress. He spoke the words as if he were merely reading a weather forecast, stating a plain fact that everyone present would soon acknowledge as the truth. The entire House Oversight Committee room fell into a deathly silence, with every camera, reporter, and staff member freezing in anticipation. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responded with a laugh, not one of nervousness, but a rehearsed performance she had perfected before mirrors. It was the sort of laugh that signaled she considered him beneath her, a reaction designed to play perfectly in social media clips. She thought this would be entertaining as she leaned into her own mic, her $3,000 blazer catching the studio lights perfectly. Her team had selected that specific jacket for the television cameras just as they had spent nearly an hour on her makeup that morning. This was meant to be her moment, another viral instance where she destroyed a Republican witness. A failed police officer turned podcaster was going to lecture her about fraud, she thought, with amusement. She paused for dramatic effect, looking around the chamber with theatrical disbelief, asking if he planned to sell her gold coins or survival rations next. Scattered chuckles erupted from the Democratic side of the aisle, and a few aides pulled out phones to record what they expected to be another takedown. She was in her element now, playing the role of the clapback queen and the voice of a generation. Maybe he should stick to yelling at older people on the radio, she suggested, and leave the serious work to those who understand policy. More laughter followed, and a staffer flashed her a thumbs-up sign. Bongino remained motionless, sitting with hands clasped, watching her display with the patience of a man who had served 12 years in the Secret Service. He had guarded presidents and faced actual lethal threats, so he knew how to wait. As the laughter died down and the silence returned, her smile flickered briefly because she was unaccustomed to opponents who did not react. She fed on emotional responses and needed them to sustain her momentum. Bongino simply asked if she was finished, his voice flat and unimpressed. She retorted that she was just getting started and called him a tough guy who represented everything wrong with the country. Bongino reached down to open his briefcase, revealing worn leather that was practical rather than ostentatious. He replied that he was also just beginning as he retrieved a single, nondescript manila folder. It was not thick or dramatic, but it bore a typed label that he positioned for the cameras to see. The label read, "Ocasio-Cortez the Fraud," causing whispers to ripple through the audience. Bongino let the figure of $47 million hang in the air, giving the words space to resonate. He stated that this was the amount of money that had moved through her network of LLCs and shell companies over 4 years. $47 million had come from people who believed in her cause. He opened the folder, declaring that he knew where every penny went, including every transfer, payment, and deception. He looked directly at her with steady eyes, promising that by the time he finished, everyone watching would know too. He pulled out the first document and remarked that she should have remained a bartender, as that was at least an honest profession. She opened her mouth to retort, to do what she always did, but no words escaped her lips. For the first time in her political career, she had absolutely nothing to say, while Dan Bongino was merely warming up. He flipped to the first section of the file, moving with the methodical patience of a man who had built cases against cartels. Every gesture was deliberate, and every pause calculated. As he suggested, they start with something simple. He proposed they discuss how she lived, causing her to roll her eyes with practiced dismissal. She remarked sarcastically about the right-wing obsession with her clothing, calling it unoriginal. He clarified that it was not about her clothes, but about the canyon between what she preached and how she lived. He produced a lease agreement, noting that she spoke often about affordable housing as a human right. She had claimed working families were being crushed by rent and forced out of their neighborhoods. He placed the lease on the table, revealing her apartment in Navy Yard costing $3,500 a month. It was a luxury building featuring a rooftop pool, a modern gym, and a 24-hour concierge service. He looked up, noting that her rent was more than most families in her district earned in a month. He emphasized that this exceeded their total income from working multiple jobs, not just their housing budget. She shifted in her seat, a subtle change in posture that the cameras immediately captured. She argued that maintaining two residences was standard for members of Congress given the housing prices. Bongino produced a spreadsheet with highlighted rows showing available apartments within 2 miles of the Capitol. There were plenty of modest options under $2,000, the kind of places working people actually inhabited. He set the list down, noting she did not want those because she preferred the luxury building with amenities her constituents would never know. The cost per month was more than some of them earned in 6 weeks of full-time labor. He paused to say there was nothing wrong with wanting nice things or enjoying success. However, he noted it was wrong to build a brand on telling others they cannot have nice things while living in luxury herself. Her attorney whispered something, but she waved him away with irritation. Bongino moved to the next exhibit to discuss the Green New Deal, her signature legislation. He produced a thick document, reminding her she had claimed climate change was an existential threat. She had stated on the House floor that everyone needed to radically change their travel and consumption habits. He revealed FAA records showing 66 flights in 12 months, every single one in first or business class. The room stirred as he noted her personal carbon footprint from air travel alone exceeded that of 20 average families combined. She wanted working people to give up cars and meat to save the planet. Yet she flew in luxury. He looked at her and remarked that first class was certainly more comfortable. She grabbed her microphone, her voice pitching higher, claiming those were work-related flights for official business. Bongino held up a photograph so every camera could see it clearly. It showed Miami Beach in February, while Texas was freezing and people were dying without power. The photo depicted her in a bikini with champagne, laughing at a beach cabana. She had flown to Florida for a fundraiser at a mansion while her colleagues organized relief, and her constituents faced winter emergencies. He noted a friend had posted the image on Instagram, deleting it an hour later due to the optics. He produced another image showing her back in New York, 2 days later tweeting about climate justice. He looked at her with pity, commenting that the champagne on the beach must have been nice. Her face flushed red, and her hands gripped the table as she claimed it was a previously scheduled event. Bongino interrupted, uninterested in explanations, and moved to her stance on defunding the police. He spread out documents showing her personal security expenses, which her office had tried to bury. He pointed to numbers totaling over $70,000 for armed private security. She hired professionals with guns to keep her safe while telling single mothers they did not need police protection. She argued that her situation was different because she received credible death threats. Bongino's voice hardened as he countered that the single mother working a night shift faced threats daily. The difference was that they could not afford private security, yet she wanted to remove their only protection. The room fell completely silent, even the typing of keyboards ceasing. Bongino pulled out documents regarding the staff who worked for her every day. These were the young idealists who believed in her message and wanted to join her movement. He read from anonymous complaints filed with the Office of Congressional Ethics. One quote described her demanding absolute loyalty while treating staff like servants, expecting unpaid overtime. Another page noted she preached workers' rights, but ran her office like a sweatshop. Interns worked full-time without pay, while she gave speeches about living wages. A third quote described two versions of her: the public champion and the private tyrant who screamed at junior staff. He set the documents down, stating the champion of the working class could not treat her own workers with decency. Her voice cracked as she claimed these were unsubstantiated accusations from disgruntled employees. He corrected her, noting they were sworn statements filed under penalty of perjury. Bongino closed that section, remarking that hypocrisy was sad, but not a crime. He opened the next section where the pages were denser, signaling they had arrived at actual crimes. He took a slow breath to pace the tension, knowing this section would end careers. He stated they needed to talk about the $47 million that flowed through her political network. He produced a complex diagram showing lines connecting boxes and money flows. It depicted a web of organizations like Brand New Congress PAC and Justice Democrats, all connected to her. He noted the money moved in patterns that would make a money launderer jealous. She forced a laugh, claiming they were legitimate organizations supporting progressive candidates. He held up the diagram, offering to walk everyone through it step by step. He explained that donations came into the PAC from small donors who believed in fighting corruption. He traced a line showing that money was then paid to a private LLC for campaign services. That LLC then paid a consulting firm called Middle Seat for more undefined services. He asked her to guess who controlled Middle Seat Consulting. Silence followed as he revealed it was her former chief of staff, the man who recruited her. Bongino explained the money went in a circle from PIC to LLC to consulting firm and back to her inner circle. Millions disappeared into vague categories like operating expenses along the way. He showed FEC records indicating over $1 million in payments that could not be accounted for. The documentation was missing, and the money had simply vanished. He noted the FEC had received complaints but was deadlocked by partisan lines. He looked at her and stated that the FBI did not have that problem and was investigating carefully. Her attorney began writing furiously, appearing pale. Bongino moved to a specific topic, bringing up her boyfriend, Riley Roberts. The room went still as he described Roberts as a web developer, not a political strategist. He revealed records showing her campaign paid Roberts $6,000 a month for over a year. He calculated that over $72,000 of donor money went to him for marketing consulting. He asked what campaigns or strategies he had created to earn that money. The silence stretched as Bongino answered for her, stating there was no portfolio or evidence of work. She defensively claimed Riley provided valuable digital strategy. Bongino cut through her excuse, challenging her to show the committee a single piece of his work. He stated he had reviewed every filing, and Riley's name only appeared on payment records. He then introduced the story of Maria Gonzalez, a single mother in the Bronx. Maria worked 2 jobs cleaning offices and folding clothes to make $14 an hour. In 2018, Maria donated $50 to the campaign, representing a full day's wages. She had skipped groceries that week because she believed in the candidate. Bongino tapped the payment record, stating Maria's money helped pay the boyfriend $6,000 a month. Maria starved so her kids could eat, while her donation subsidized a lifestyle. The congresswoman blinked rapidly, her eyes becoming wet with emotion or calculation. She claimed this was a gross mischaracterization of campaign finance. Bongino produced an email from her personal account to her chief of staff. He read the email, which instructed him to make sure transfers did not look connected. It explicitly said to use different entity names so small donors would never find the true beneficiaries. He set the email down, calling it direct instruction to hide the money trail. A Democratic member shifted uncomfortably, refusing to make eye contact. Bongino stated she told donors like Maria they were funding a revolution, but they were funding her inner circle. He produced a final document showing $4.2 million went to entities controlled by her associates. He let that number sit in the air, emphasizing it came from people who sacrificed for her. He closed that section, noting that this was only the money traceable to American donors. He opened the next section, warning that the story was about to get much darker. This section contained photographs clipped to the top. He began with the date in June 2018 that transformed her career. He held up the famous photo of her crying at the border fence in Texas. It was the image of compassion that launched 1,000 news segments. He set it down, describing a young Latina overcome with emotion at the sight of separated families. He paused, stating there was just one problem with that narrative. He held up a photo taken 5 minutes prior showing her laughing and checking makeup at the same fence. Another image taken 12 minutes later showed her smiling broadly for selfies. Her grief lasted exactly as long as needed for the photographers to get the shot. She shook her head, claiming she was genuinely overwhelmed by what she saw. Bongino produced a text log from her communications director sent that morning. The text instructed photographers to be positioned for the emotion shot and to have tissues ready. It was a performance manufactured for political impact. He read another text from her to her campaign manager about capitalizing on the photo for fundraising. His voice dropped as he reminded her that the children's suffering was real. He looked at her, accusing her of using them as props for an email blast. Her voice cracked as she claimed to care deeply and fight for immigration reform. Bongino produced her schedule, showing she never visited a border facility again after the photo op. She found time for over 400 media interviews and magazine shoots, however. She raised $11 million off immigration appeals, but did nothing substantive. He showed her social media posts comparing agents to Nazi guards. He noted her inflammatory words put targets on the backs of federal agents. He read a report about agents assaulted by protesters, citing her rhetoric. One agent was hospitalized with brain damage while she got her headlines. Bongino then examined what she actually did for policy. He held up a thin document representing every piece of legislation she sponsored. There was not a single substantive bill that became law, only symbolic gestures. He revealed that open border advocacy groups donated heavily to her after the viral photo. Some of these groups had been flagged by law enforcement for concerning connections. She slammed her hand on the table, calling it a racist insinuation. He held up a DHS report naming 3 specific groups that donated to her. He asked if she did any due diligence, but the silence confirmed she just cashed the checks. He spoke with anger about migrants dying in the desert because they were told the border was open. She profited from the chaos and built her brand on the bodies of suffering people. He closed that section, stating that exploiting immigrants was not even the worst thing. He opened the final section regarding what she really thought of her voters. He addressed the Amazon HQ2 deal in 2019, which would have brought 25,000 jobs to her district. She led the opposition, calling it corporate welfare, and Amazon eventually pulled out. She celebrated it as a victory, but Bongino asked who it was a victory for. He produced an email she sent to a major donor after the withdrawal. It stated that the deal worked out because tech workers would have gentrified the district. The email explained that it was better to keep the current base of poor people who depend on government programs. Bongino stated she killed the jobs because financially secure voters might not need her anymore. She denied the meaning of the email, but he demanded she explain it to her constituents. She could not answer, so he produced phone records regarding her personal thoughts. He held up texts sent to a college friend from Boston University. He read a text where she called Bronx people easy to manipulate with socialism and Spanish phrases. Gasps erupted from the gallery as he read another text claiming they were not smart enough to know they were played. A third text described the Bronx as just a brand she owned and claimed she would never live there again. She whispered that the texts were out of context, claiming she was venting. Bongino asked what context made it acceptable to call voters trained seals. He moved on to who she employed in her congressional office. Out of 14 full-time staffers, 12 were from out of state and 10 had Ivy League degrees. Only 2 actually grew up in the community she claimed to represent. Her Hispanic outreach coordinator was raised in Connecticut and did not speak fluent Spanish. He noted there were young people in the Bronx who would give anything for a chance to work there. Bongino brought up her heritage, noting she presented herself as a girl from the streets. He read a linguist's analysis of her Spanish, describing it as Americanized and learned in school. She began crying, claiming this was a racist attack on her identity. He clarified it was an observation about the gap between her performance and reality. She grew up in a wealthy suburb with a household income of $96,000. He stated she stole the identity of a community she did not belong to in order to advance her career. In private, she laughed at them for believing her. He closed the folder, declaring this was not socialism, but plain fraud. The atmosphere in the room shifted from political theater to something tragic. The polished warrior was replaced by a broken figure. She demanded the right to respond, and the chairman granted her a statement. She tried to summon her old fire, calling it a political witch hunt by right-wing forces. She claimed the evidence was twisted to silence the voice of working people. She looked at the cameras, asserting they were afraid of her movement. She turned to Bongino, calling him a failed cop and a puppet for billionaires. Bongino reached back into his briefcase and asked if she was done. He produced a cooperation agreement signed by her former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti. The color drained from her face as he revealed her architect had been talking to feds for 6 months. He produced another document regarding her boyfriend, who had also been interviewed by the FBI. 4 former staff members had also given sworn statements about the abuse. He told her the witch hunt was over because the evidence was corroborated. She turned desperately to her squad colleagues for help. Representative Omar studied her notes, while others looked away or at their phones. Bongino quietly told her they were not coming to save her because they knew this was coming. He read statements from Omar and Tlaib, distancing themselves from her financial arrangements. Representative Presley had unfollowed her and deleted photos. They had calculated the odds and chosen to save themselves. She looked around the room, realizing she was utterly alone. She whispered that it wasn't fair, sounding like a broken child, claiming she tried to help. Bongino responded with disappointment, suggesting she might have believed that once. He noted that somewhere along the way, she started believing she was special and above the rules. He did not think she was evil, but rather someone who got too much power too young. He stood up, stating that her intentions did not undo the damage or return the money. Chairman James directed staff to refer the matter to the Department of Justice. He advised her to retain legal counsel and adjourned the hearing. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled, and she pushed away staff who tried to help. She walked into a blinding storm of camera flashes and shouted questions. She did not answer, for words had finally abandoned her. Her career ended not with handcuffs, but with silence, which felt worse. The news spread instantly, and calls for her resignation began within hours. In the Bronx, Maria Gonzalez watched the news on an old television. She held the receipt for the $50 she had donated years ago. She told a reporter she had told her daughters to look up to this woman. Tears came as she recounted skipping groceries to invest in someone who understood them. Now she knew the woman had laughed at them and called them stupid. Maria said the worst part was not the money, but the hope that was stolen. Across the district, similar scenes played out in diners and apartments. People who had given their votes and dreams watched their faith collapse. Bongino gave only one interview, stating he felt no pride in the destruction. He felt sympathy for who she could have been if she had been honest. Later, Bongino sat alone in his office, filing away the evidence. He thought about the young woman who was sure she would change the world. She had made small compromises that grew until the lie became too heavy. His phone buzzed with a message about a new file on a different politician. There was always another true believer who traded principles for power. He turned off the light and went home to his family, knowing the work would continue. 3 days later, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez resigned, citing personal reasons and admitting no wrongdoing. The wheels of justice continued to turn without her. Maria went back to work, taking down the poster of the Congresswoman. Some things, once broken, could never be repaired.